Michael Philip Mossman, how are you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. We just had a blizzard here in New York. We're actually Connecticut, where I am right now, but yeah, we got blasted.
Yeah, what was it? Oh, that's right, that's right. Jerry Bergonzi was going to have a live stream, and it got changed from I think today to Monday, and he cited the weather as a reason. So must be the same thing.
Yeah, I think they got worse than we did up there. It's just yeah, and you're in Ohio, right? So
we're in Ohio. I mean, we got what was it? Was it yesterday or the day before yesterday? It must have been the day before yesterday. We got snow, so it looks like Christmas, but it's it's all the roads are all dry. It's just the trees have it. I mean, it was like just the perfect kind of snow to stick on the branches and to create that sort of otherworldly kind of look. But it's not it's not unsafe to drive or anything like that. So. But yeah, so I was saying before we started rolling that Byron Stripling says hello.
Byron is one of my heroes. We played together in the Carnegie Hall Jazz Band with John Faddis, and Byron in the trumpet section was just it's just hilarious. We used to laugh so hard sometimes we couldn't even catch our breath.
Yeah, he's a funny dude. We just recorded with the Columbus Jazz Orchestra a holiday concert, a Christmas concert, and it's going to be one of these things where it's on JAG TV, Jazz Arts Group television, and it's like it's like a pay portal or whatever, and then you can watch the concert or whatever. So that's something that the Columbus Jazz Orchestra has been doing as a way to kind of deal with the sort of new reality of not being able to do what we really want to do, which is play for an audience.
Well, it's interesting, a lot of organizations that have not really been tech advanced have been kind of dragged kicking and screaming into this, and in some ways it's helped groups to get the energy and the commitment to learn, to take part in the digital world. I mean, music is an analog thing. We love playing music. We love being in rooms together, and that's never going to change. But the way that arts organizations work and the way that we reach out to our audiences and the way we keep contact with people, it's just the way things are. And this rude awakening has spurred a lot of people and a lot of organizations to just adopt these new practices.
Yeah, jazz organizations, orchestras around the country, also churches, right? So colleges, universities, everybody is sort of in the same boat. Fortunately, my church gig is something I've been able to continue doing. It's just no congregation, but but we've been live streaming the services, and it's quite a blessing to be able to actually play consistently.
You haven't been able to meet at reduced capacity in the church. It's just really been not at all.
Yeah, well, there are some churches in Columbus. It's not an issue of a mandate. There are some churches that have been meeting in a diminished capacity, but the leadership at the church that I work at, it's an elderly church.
Oh, sure.
A lot of old people, and the pastor just really wants to kind of drag, just let's see what happens, and he's just trying to do the safe thing. A lot of these churches have been really very much practically destroyed by this pandemic, because it's hard to get people to give if they're not in the facility sometimes, right? The church I work at, remarkably, it's been a net zero. People have really stepped up, and it's been important. And there's a number of churches, I think, that have experienced that, but disproportionate number of them have experienced something different than that, you know. And yeah, it's kind of a funky thing, but you know, you know, like I said, you know, like you were saying, technology, I think, has been maybe a way through. You know, it would be much, much, much worse if we didn't have the technology that we have.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Just have to survive, and we will. We will. The better days are soon, are ahead pretty soon, I think.
Yeah. So, you know, we're Facebook friends, and I think we have a lot of folks in common. Maybe some folks that we know of, and then like Byron, but then a bunch of folks that we probably don't know of. That's just how this business is. One person, you know, I interviewed Byron. I also interviewed Frank Green, and I played with Frank Green in the Basie band, and of course Byron is also an alumnus from that band. He's actually how I got the gig. Scotty Barnhart, who I also interviewed, Scotty called Byron and said, "Hey, the band is going to be in Cleveland. We need a saxophone player," and he gave him my name, and so that, you know, the rest is history, as they say. I'm not a permanent member of the band, but I've done a number of tours with them, and it's always a good time.
That's a wonderful band. I played actually one time with the Basie band, subbing for Bobby. I think he pronounced it Ojeda. I don't know if it's Ojeda but he pronounced it Ojeda. But yeah, I subbed for him up in a gig in Boston when Thad was conducting the band. Dennis Wilson was in the band. Dennis McCrell, you know, who's with us at Queens College. Dennis was playing drums. Byron was playing lead trumpet in the band. And man, I had such a ball. Such a wonderful band. It's a family band.
Yeah. So, okay. So tell us about yourself, and where you're from, and where you grew up, and what your childhood was like. Maybe you can focus a little bit on the kind of music maybe that was sort of native to your household, what was playing all the time, and then maybe talk about some like early mentors and teachers, and maybe early schooling and stuff like that.
Sure. I don't think it really follows the usual path. I grew up in a very blue-collar part of southeastern Pennsylvania. If you go southwest of the Philadelphia airport, between Philadelphia and Wilmington, Delaware, it's a little corridor along I-95, and there's this kind of a strip of industrial places. There's a oil refinery there. There's a Scott paper plant. There's a Boeing factory there, at least it was. And you know, it's pretty factory oriented, kind of sandwiched in there along this little narrow strip, and mostly starter houses for young families. But that's where I grew up, and not a lot of culture there. Not a real magnet school for the arts, I would say. More of a kind of a you know, more of a football, wrestling kind of area. Also, we were probably the only Jewish family in the neighborhood. So, you know, in a kind of Irish and Italian, Roman Catholic, and a lot of Irish and Italian families. But mostly, you know, just kind of it was, I would say it was probably white flight from Philadelphia, from South Philadelphia and West Philadelphia. That's what that neighborhood was. It was just starter development. And my father worked in the defense industry and used to commute to New Jersey every day. And you know, it was not the most pleasant upbringing, I would say. It was not, like I say, it was, I experienced a great deal of anti-Semitism. There was a lot of racism in the neighborhood. I saw those things on a daily basis, a lot of bullying. It's not a lot of fun. On the other hand, one of the great things about the neighborhood is that we were close in proximity to
Thank you so much for watching my video so far. If you'd like to support, there are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video.
In proximity to Temple University radio station. And even back then, they played jazz. They had a jazz station there, WRTI. And, you know, I started playing the trumpet at the age of 8. And I didn't like trumpet lessons. I didn't like the music. I didn't know how to read music. I took trumpet lessons. They were making me play these dumb songs. And I dropped it. I dropped the lessons. I still played in the band. I played in the school band, but I basically learned how to play trumpet by ear. But because, you know, just searching around on the radio, I would just search for anything that had a trumpet on it. Back in those days, I had a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and I kept a microphone. And if I heard anything with a trumpet on it, I would just turn on my tape recorder, and I would tape these things, and I would try to play along. So, you know, the people I heard were you know, Lee Morgan and Maynard Ferguson and Freddie Hubbard. And I didn't even know, to tell you, you know, I didn't even know the music was called jazz, really, when I first heard it. I just knew it was music that had trumpet in it. And there was other things too, like Herb Alpert, or there was, you know, or just whatever had a trumpet in it, I would just learn to play it by ear. And I think the upshot of that was that my model of what a trumpet was not the kid sitting next to me in band or even my teacher, but I learned my concept of how to play the trumpet, what the trumpet should sound like, was listening to professional trumpet players. And even though I couldn't read music, I didn't learn how to read music until I was about 15. But whatever anyone could play, if I heard it, I could play it. So, you know, that had limitations. And also, I also taught myself how to play the trumpet incorrectly. You know, so I kind of built in some just some structural issues about how to play the instrument that, you know, having a good teacher would have helped. But at any rate, I found that both music and later sports too, because you know, later I you know, got very much into sports. I found those two things to be kind of a refuge. That this place I could kind of make my own way with those things, and that helped a lot. And it's funny because, you know, because I listened to all these musicians. Eventually, when I would you know, hear these names, and I would go to those record stores, and I would try to, when I had any money, which was not that often, when I had any money, I would go to a record store and I would try to pick up an album. And, you know, if I heard about someone like Freddie Hubbard, I would go buy an album of Freddie Hubbard. And you know, how we all learned about the music was reading the liner notes on the record covers. So I heard about people like Jimmy Heath, and I heard about people like McCoy Tyner, and you know, Herbie Hancock and Ron Carter, and all these people. You know, these were names that I was familiar with, even in this kind of strange neighborhood that I grew up in. And it's funny. I tell my students that I used to practice with these albums, you know, and I'd close my eyes and I'd play along with these albums, and I would just think like, man, maybe one of these guys is going to be driving through the neighborhood, and they're going to hear me practicing, and and I'm going to get discovered. So, you know, I tell my students that I used to close my eyes and just imagine that they were there, and then one day I opened my eyes and they were there. Because that's really kind of what happened. You know, one day all these people that you grew up, you know, just with this illusion in your mind about what, you know, what they'd be like, and, you know, what playing with them would be. And I think that's one of the greatest things for a kid, is to have that kind of passion, and you know, just the idea of there's a world outside of where you're growing up, and it's a bigger world, and there's all these great things, and all this wonderful music happening. And it's true. It is like that.
Yeah. So there's a picture, and it's on your Facebook. It's one of the more recent pictures that you posted. It's a picture of, there's Clark Terry and yourself, John Faddis, Frank Green. And who were the others in the picture?
Earl Stafford was there.
Right.
Yeah, so it was Terrell, it was Frank, it was John Faddis, it was Earl Gardner,
Okay. Yeah.
Clark. Yeah, I mean that was
Yeah.
the Carnegie Hall trumpet section, 4 of us plus John leading the band, and Clark was our guest, which he frequently was with the Carnegie Hall band, and he was just hilarious. Absolutely.
Now, it would have been his 100th birthday recently.
Yeah.
And it seems that this is the reason you put that up there is to commemorate that. Can you talk a little bit about Clark Terry's influence on you?
You know, I came to, it's interesting because there's so many musicians, the way I came into the music was very much scattershot. I didn't come to it through the way that I really think that jazz education has improved so much because there's so much more information available, and it was just hit or miss for people that I was exposed to at a young age. And fortunately, like I say, I was exposed to some really good musicians through this radio station, through WRTI, but there was many more that I didn't hear of. And Clark, I didn't really get to know Clark's playing until probably, at some point when I was in college. Of course, I was exposed to Clark's playing through other players who got a lot from him, and I would include in that Miles Davis certainly owes a lot to Clark Terry, and I would say that Wynton Marsalis as well. So yeah, influence indirectly. Same thing with Louis Armstrong. I didn't really dig on Louis Armstrong. Hearing that music, I just I was like, hello Dolly, and what a wonderful world. And I didn't really dig on Louis Armstrong until I got to college. I went to Oberlin Conservatory, and I don't know if you get a chance to meet Wendell Logan. Did you know Wendell when he was there? Did you get a chance?
I mean, we know a lot of the same folks. I don't know that I ever met him, but I know who he is certainly.
Yeah, Wendell was the guy who built the jazz program at Oberlin Conservatory, fighting his way through a really horrendous treatment there. I don't know if you know about that, but he was resisted at every turn when he was there. Even when I was there, it just was not respected. There was no jazz program there. It was Afro-American music studies. It was just a kind of a side minor, I guess you could call it. But notwithstanding, Wendell Logan produced some really remarkable, not only remarkable players, but remarkable people. He was really, in some ways, a kind of a second father, the way I felt, because his knowledge and just his way of being, his way of communicating was very succinct and direct. I don't know if you know it, but Wendell was starting lineman on the Florida A&M football team. So he was a PhD in classical composition and a starting lineman on the Florida A&M football team. That tells you something about this guy. So he's a very intelligent guy who could not suffer fools gladly, let's say. So he had all this, this ability and knowledge, and he's in this school in the middle of nowhere. Oberlin's in the middle of nowhere, and the people treating him badly. They didn't understand what he was doing. They didn't appreciate it, and I guess a lot of them saw it as a threat. And he absorbed all that in a way that guides me as a teacher even now. When people treated him with that level of disrespect and just ignorance, it's like he treated them as if they had some sort of a malady, like it was like a disease to be treated. Students that came with an attitude, he didn't. It's almost as if he didn't see it as a personal attack on him. Although perhaps it was. But his way of dealing it was to deflect it and treat it like this is something that's wrong with this person, and let me push past this. I think that his way of absorbing that negative energy, I think in the end, he probably killed him, because he holding all that in, it's difficult. It's not healthy. Exploding is not healthy either. But I think that the fight that he fought at Oberlin to build that jazz program, which is a wonderful program now. They have a whole building just for jazz now. He bore the brunt of that, and I every day when I teach, I try to live up to the standard that he set in that regard.
Yeah. So so the jazz thing in the academy is it's a challenging sort of thing. So I'm director of jazz studies at Ohio State, and um, the conservatory model was not designed to accommodate jazz, right? It wasn't really designed for that. It was designed to prop up uh, an art music, right? Western European art music, and the way that you view art music is much differently than jazz, right? Miles Davis famously or infamously said, don't call it jazz, it's social music, right? And so that there's a different sort of context for social music, and the way that music that has such an oral primacy and not this sort of the sacred nature of the score, that sort of approach that the Western classical music has, Western European classical music has. There's much of more of a emphasis on the ear and on feel and obviously on rhythm. And so although I think we've made a lot of progress, there's a lot of programs that offer a jazz studies degree, bachelor's degree. However, there's still a long, long way to go, because I think mostly it's that people don't really talk. They don't really have the conversations, It's like, I'm doing my thing, you're doing your thing. Okay, that's cool. That's enough, right? And I think having more conversations about, having more conversations about the music, the tradition, how we can maybe do some more collaborative kind of projects together. And so you can kind of demystify, the other tradition, and actually even maybe eliminate thinking about other music, because at least in the modern, in my performing context, I see it all as very much the same. There's so much beauty, and there's so much great music out there, and there's no need to sort of section off or isolate oneself from. And why would you want to do that? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, most of the guys that I've studied with and worked with, and I'm talking about people like Slide Hampton and Frank West and Chico O'Farrell and Thad. These were musicians who were so wide open that they're always learning. I mean, Jimmy Heath was writing new music right up to the point of his passing recently, and they were interested in all music. They're like funk music, classical music, different forms of jazz, rock and roll, even some guys that even in the country music, and of course that's part of the Basie tradition too. They did all those country charts. That was kind of a thing for a minute. That album Pop Goes to Basie had some Your Cheating Heart and all those kinds of songs that they did in the country music. It's a real celebration of culture, and not seeing that other people's culture is the enemy, but trying to figure out, well, how do we bring this culture into our music? How do we absorb this, and how do we bring this into our family? I find that many of the musicians I was lucky enough to meet when I first came to New York were like that. They weren't like, well, who are you and what are you? They were like, well, let's hear you play. What do you got to say? And if they liked the way you played and they liked you personally and you weren't a jerk,
right?
You're like, welcome to the family. Let's play some music. I was, you know, again, coming from where I came from, where people were, you know, there's so much prejudice. Uh, just finding this island of sanity and humanity and decency. People that they just like you because of your music. They just want to know you. That I found that extraordinary. I always do. Like, you know, travel to China, you travel to Japan, you travel to Africa, you travel to Eastern Europe, Western Europe. All these people, and they all dig the same thing. How's that possible? You know, that this music resonates with so many people from so many different backgrounds. Yeah, they hear Ella Fitzgerald, they just lose their minds. You know,
Yeah.
it's amazing.
Yeah, you know, something that I've said frequently over these interviews is I can't think of a career, you know, where I would make so many instantaneous friends.
That's right.
Just instantaneous. I mean, you play one song together 20 years ago, and it's just, there's a lock. It's just, and it's, you get back together and it's like, you never took any time off. You just, you know, it's like you were and it's a continuation. It's not even like, I don't know. There's just something about drinking from the same water or something. It's, you know, and you know, and it's like everybody knows you've been drinking from that water, the people that you play with, you know, and because they've been drinking from it too, you know, and it's just such a beautiful thing. Music. I can't remember who I was talking to, but it was I don't know, this was years ago, and I was watching some dating show or something. I can't remember what the show was. It was like you know, and there were like 3 guys, and the girl, she had to decide who she was going to pick, and one of the guys immediately disqualified himself by saying that he hates music. And that always sticks out in my head because, you know, because I want to say, who hates music? Like, I've never heard anyone say that they hate music. What kind of weird person would you have to be to say that you hate music? And then that memory always comes up. So I'm like, well, I guess there is one that would admit that.
When you think, when you think about, one of the things about music is it requires you to synchronize with other people. Yeah. Well, just the whole thing about keeping time. When we play music together, you know, we agree. We agree on pitch. We agree on the beat. We agree on tempo. We agree on style. We agree. People that are not able to agree with anyone else. They're not able to synchronize with other people. It's, you know, it's well, look who we got going, and look who we got running things right now. You know, there has been no music in the White House for the past 4 years. You know, it's the person that's not able to synchronize with other people. And, you know, which is really what we're talking about is narcissism. The people who just, they're not interested. They're not really interested in reaching out. They're not interested in working with other people. Those are the people that are most likely not going to be interested in music because of what music represents and what music requires.
Yeah.
You have to sacrifice, you have to bend, and you have to work with other people to create it. Or in some cases, even to enjoy it. Like if you're dancing with somebody, you're just doing your own thing and you're not connecting. And you know, what is that? That's what music can do for us.
So where did you go to school? And maybe pick up your story kind of where you left off.
Well, it's interesting. You know, at a certain point, as I said, I grew up in this strange little corner of the world. But I found my way to a little music school in Wilmington, Delaware, in the same neighborhood where Clifford Brown came from. And I went to a jazz camp, and I didn't know anybody there, but as it turned out, Sir Roland Hanna was there, Joe Chambers was there, a trumpet player named Marvin Stam.
Oh yeah, I know Marvin. Yeah,
Don Zabeski. who I wound up studying with. Ranger was there. In fact, I had my first lessons, and Marvin, I played in Marvin's band, and he said, "What are you doing, man? You don't know how to read. You don't have any technique. You got some talent." Because I played lead trumpet in his band. There were 5 bands, and I played lead trumpet in his band. And he says, "Man, you need to take some lessons." So I got all excited, and I said, "Okay, and let me find a teacher." And I did. I wound up finding a teacher. Finding a teacher, was it was a little Portuguese guy. And I used to ask him, I said, "Did you ever have any students that ever made it, ever really, did anything?" He said, "Well, there was this little kid, there's this little guy named Marcus. He went on and he did some things." And I never knew who little Marcus was until years later. I was playing in Pittsburgh at a jazz festival, and Jerry Allen was playing. She brought a group there, some of her friends from Detroit. And there was this trumpet player, and his Marcus Belgrade. And I said, where are you from? I said, "Well, I'm just from, I grew up on top of this rock quarry across from Chester, Pennsylvania." He says, "I'm from Chester, Pennsylvania." And I said, "Who was your teacher?" I said, "Well, Don Ramos." He said, "That was my teacher." I said, "Oh my God, you're little Marcus." Marcus Belgrade. Yeah, so that was remarkable. So anyway, I auditioned for Oberlin Conservatory and didn't get into the conservatory because not only had I never played the Haydn trumpet concerto, I had never heard of it. So I wound up going there as a sociology anthropology major. While I was there, I started taking lessons on the trumpet still, and I wanted to get into the conservatory, but the teacher there at the time was not willing to take on a jazz student and didn't think that I was going to be able to learn how to play, orchestral trumpet. Until Wendell Logan had a recital of his compositions, and the first half was all classical music, his classical compositions, and the second half was all jazz. So the trumpet teacher there, this guy named Gene Young, played the first half, and then I played the second half. And after the concert, Gene went to Wendell and said, "Hey, Mike sounded pretty good." And Wendell jacked him up by his lapels. And I kid you not, he got this guy by the lapels against the wall and said, "That kid needs to be in the trumpet studio here." And this trumpet teacher, who had all this resistance to dealing with the jazzer, accepted me into the classical trumpet studio. And I wound up having a remarkable education as a classical trumpet player. And I got very serious about it. Wound up playing first trumpet in the Oberlin Orchestra, and I went on to when I graduated from Oberlin, I moved to Chicago and I studied with Vince Chikowitz from the Chicago Symphony, and learned how to become a professional trumpet player. After 2 years of working in Chicago, which I really enjoyed very much, I met by chance, Terrence Blanchard was in town in Chicago playing the Chicago Jazz Festival with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. And after the show, I was kind of hanging out, and he was talking about this strange guy who was teaching at Rutgers named Bill Fielder. So I don't know if you ever heard of Bill Fielder, but he's, a legendary guru of the trumpet, a very strange dude. Yeah, he's very much a trumpet legend. He taught Wynton Marsalis. He taught Terrence Blanchard, taught Terrell Stafford, taught Sean Jones. All of us, everyone who studied with, we called him Prof. Everyone who studied with Prof will tell you stories about Prof. He was just a very irascible kind of guy, but he was a very serious student of the trumpet. And he was also a student, had been a student of Vincent Chikowitz, because he had studied classical music. He was from the Deep South. He was from Meridian, Mississippi. Bill was. And so anyway, Terrence was talking about this strange guy and how he'd been studying with him and all this. Well, a few days later, I'm walking down the street and a friend of mine says, "Hey, Mike, I want you to meet this friend of mine. He hasn't been in Chicago in 30 years. This is Bill Fielder." I was like, "Oh my God." So we got to talking, and he found out that I played with, I've been studying with Chikowitz, and he was like, "Oh, you have to come east, and get a lesson." So when I came back to visit my folks, I went up, took a lesson. And the head of the program at Rutgers at that time was Larry Ridley, bass player. And before I left that day, Larry had hooked up a scholarship for me to go to Rutgers. So I left Chicago and went to graduate school. I moved to New Jersey and went to graduate school and started getting my master's degree. But at the same time, I was working in New York. I started playing on Broadway. A wonderful trumpet player named Kamau Adelifu. Some people knew him as Charles Sullivan, a great jazz trumpet player, but he was a kind of a straw boss in some of the shows in New York, got me onto some Broadway show pits. And, I met Lou Soloff, and Lou started, getting me to sub for him. And then I met John Faddis, who's been one of the most incredible friends anyone could ever have. I'll tell you a funny story about John. One of the first gigs that I got when I was in graduate school, the Machito Orchestra came to our school. Now, Machito Orchestra, I never heard of the Machito Orchestra, which tells you something about the state of jazz education. That whole side of music, the whole Afro-Cuban side, no one even talked about. It wasn't part of the history. But I heard this Latin band came to, and I played Latin music. I played in Chicago. I played 2 years. I played in salsa bands. That's how you make a living when you're a trumpet player. But I'd never heard Afro-Cuban jazz played by a big band like that before. And this band came, and I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. And so I marched myself up to the stage and said to them, I got to play in this band. And they looked at me like, who the hell are you? But I gave them my card, and a couple of weeks later, they had a gig in Queens, and they called me and said, well, come on and play. So I came and played, and, there's Machito, who was very old. It was actually in the last year and a half of his life. They had me join the band. So that was, my exposure to that was probably my first gig. Anyway, the Machito Orchestra was playing a gig at this club that used to be called the Village Gate. Now, on Monday nights, they had this thing called Salsa Meets Jazz, and they'd have two Latin bands. So, for example, you might have the Machito Orchestra and Tito Puente's band, two bands. And then they have one jazz soloist. For this particular night, the jazz soloist was John Faddis. So here I am on stage. I'm playing second trumpet in the band. And, John's never seen me before, so he's not playing on this tune. So he pulls up a chair behind me. And while I'm playing, he's like whispering in my ear. He's giving me a lesson. He's saying, nope, that note's short. Nope, you're a little low on that. He's just, he sat behind me, like, giving me the running critique of my playing while he's doing it, And of course, I thought that was hysterical. Some people, John, some people really get bugged by John. He likes to needle people, but he's funny. He's not, he does like to needle people, but he's good. He's a good soul, and I thought it was hilarious. Anyway, that was my meeting John Faddis, and he became a very close friend over the years.
So I want to ask you about, you've had a quite incredible career in music, and one aspect of your musicianship that, frankly, a lot of folks may know you best for is your pen. You're composing and arranging. Can you talk about that? Was there, I'm sure there was a point when either you got an opportunity to do it and then you just really liked it, and so you dug into it more, or, talk to me about what sort of converted you. Well, I guess it's not conversion, because you obviously play. So when did that sort of take off as a big part of your career, your composing and arranging? And when did you know that was something you really wanted to pursue?
Well, I always tell my students, I think you're an arranger or composer when you hear music and you just have to know what it is. So just the same way as we, as performers, we transcribe solos. Because we just want to know what these guys are playing. We want to do it. We want to play that. We hear it and we say, wow, I want to play that. That's how I learned how to play trumpet. I hear Freddie Hubbard and I hear a lick and say, man, I got to play that lick. I got to do that. When you do the same thing with music, with an arrangement or a composition, you just have to know what it is. And you just, like for me, with no training, no musical training at all, I would sit at my father had an organ he used to play this show tunes and stuff on a electric organ. He also played the theremin, by the way. My father was a thereminist, if you know what that electronic instrument is. That's a whole other world. But anyway, I would sit there and I would just, when I heard Stolen Moments, Oliver Nelson's Stolen Moments, I just had to know what that was. I think I must have driven my parents nuts, like just trial and error, trying to find those not only the song, but the voicings and everything. I think when a person has that, I think their nature is that that's who they are. No one sits down and looks for that kind of stuff unless it's for some reason important to them. I always tell people that if you think about the earliest experience that you can remember in your whole life, if you go back the farthest you can remember to the youngest, earliest recollection of your entire life, for me, that's hearing Frame for the Blues, Slide Hampton's Frame for the Blues on the radio. It's the earliest memory that I have, was looking up and seeing this radio on a shelf and hearing that song. Now, why I was wired to be that way, I don't know. But that's the kind of thing that really registered. So anyway, going to school, I did study composition. I studied, composition with Wendell Logan. And when I got out of school, I started, when I was in graduate school, when I was in high school, I used to hear, these Don Sebesky arrangements, things that he had done for Freddie Hubbard and stuff. I knew of his music. And as a young professional in New York, I was doing, these commercial dates, just like playing jingles and stuff like that. So I go in and there's this icon, Don Sebesky, this guy who I had met in this camp, and he's, we're doing this jingle, and it's like jingles for grocery stores. ShopRite, they had every year they had a promotion. Everything that was in a can was on sale. So we recorded the can. So I'm making this money, like playing these stupid things. I thought, man, if I'm going to make this bread, I should invest some of this bread and get me some lessons with Don Sebesky. So Don had a class, arranging class that he taught, and I took that class with him. Because there was no arranging class at Rutgers at that time when I was in graduate school. There wasn't. They didn't offer that. Now there is, but at that time there wasn't. At any rate, I studied arranging, but you don't get to be an arranger unless you have a band to write for. Now, while I was in graduate school, Blue Note Records had an audition for a house band. When Marcel's had been very successful over at CBS, and Blue Note wanted to answer that with a young artist band of their own. So they hired a manager to do an audition. And a whole bunch of people sent in tapes, and on the basis of that, all these people, got invited to kind of have a shootout in New York City to become this house band. So the band was called Out of the Blue, and we had Kenny Garrett, and we had Ralph Peterson, and we had Ralph Bowen, and we had Harry Pickens, and we had Bob Hurst was playing bass, and I won the trumpet spot in there. So suddenly we had this jazz sextet, and we had a contract with Blue Note. So I started writing music for this sextet. And, for all of us, it was kind of trial and error, learning how to write at the same time. We were learning how to play, and we were learning how to write and learn how to be professional musicians. But suddenly we had this opportunity to record our music. So it was really much, I would go to school and I would learn a new chord, or I'd learn a new progression, and I would try to write a song based on what I'd learned. And the next thing you know, we're recording it in the studio. So I had some experience writing for small groups, but I never had any experience writing for big band. Until, funny enough, I was, and this is another funny story, when Machito passed away, when Machito died, his son, Mario, kept the band going. But the original Machito Orchestra, the musical director of that band was a man named Mario Bausá, who was generally considered, one of the founders of Afro-Cuban jazz. He's a good friend of Dizzy Gillespie's. He introduced Dizzy to Chano Pozo. And, they consciously fuse bebop, not just jazz, but specifically bebop with Cuban music. There was, and that's why you hear a lot of songs, a lot of bebop songs have clave, whether it's Moose the Mooch, or there's a connection there between, this idea of clave and this kind of before and after, push and pull kind of part to the music. And anyway, Mario was this amazing musician, but was not famous amongst the public because he was always a musical director. He was not a famous soloist, and he was not a famous band leader. He was just the musical director. He hired the guys, he hired the arrangers. He was an arranger, he was a saxophone player, and he was a trumpet player. He was the lead trumpet player in Chick Webb's band. He was a child prodigy. He played, clarinet in the Havana Philharmonic before he was even 10. He's really a legendary musician. Anyway, Victor Paz, who was a great lead trumpet player in New York, invited me to join Mario's band. Now imagine I'm in Mario Bowser's band. I don't even know who he is. Okay, so that shows you how hip I am, how hip I was. But anyway, all these great musicians, were in the band. We were playing charts by Chico O'Farrell and by Ray Santos and Rene Hernandez, all these the great arrangers of Afro-Cuban jazz. But in the meantime, I got my first teaching job, and it was at Rutgers, because their band was kind of falling apart, and they wanted me to come in there and kind of get it back together again. And since I just graduated from there recently, they wanted me to, I had some connection to the program. So anyway, the first thing I did was I threw half the people in the band out of the band. I said, you can't be in the band, this band's terrible, and you guys have to earn your way into this band. But by throwing half the people out of the band, suddenly I had a band with like 2 trumpets, a French horn, 3 saxophones, a trombone. And so I couldn't use any of the music in the band's library, couldn't just use charts with, half the instruments gone. So I started writing music for the band. I had to write music. We had to have something to play. So I had to write something. So here I am writing these charts for this big band. And, most of them sounded pretty bad because I'm just getting started. Anyway, I'm sitting on a bus one day with, writing a chart for the band. And Mario, founder of Afro-Cuban Jazz, sits next to me on the bus and says, I like how you write for the bass. Scratch something out for the band. So he invites me to write something for the band. I'm thinking, okay, Chico Farrell, Ray Santos, Rene Hernandez, and Michael Mossman. Like, which of those names doesn't belong? But I wrote a chart. It was called Paz Profundo, named after Victor Paz. That's why it's Profundo instead of Profunda. And we recorded it on an album called My Time Is Now. And the band liked it. They liked it. They liked the chart. So next thing you know, the next album we did, 944 Columbus, I wrote 4 charts. And then the next thing you know, Tito Puente started asking me for charts. And the next thing you know, Ray Barretto started asking me for charts. And John Faddis started asking me for charts for the Carnegie Hall Band. And then, Slide Hampton had me write some stuff for his band, which is kind of like God asking you to make a flower or something like that. Here's your best shot. But suddenly I had a career as an arranger, all because of Mario Bauza. Wow. That's how that happened. And I of course, when you get a bunch of great musicians to play your music, that's a powerful drug. This is Bubba, by the way. You guys maybe you'll see Bubba in the background.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a dog person also.
Yeah.
That's I can't imagine my life without a dog. It's such a the quality of life is so much better. That's the only way I can think of it. And people that don't have pets or in particular don't have a dog or never had a dog, it's hard to describe, but it's like having the most loyal, I mean, it's just a it's a wonderful thing. That's a bit of a change of topic, but that's all right. I did want to ask you about your relationship with Bob Mintzer.
Oh, wow. So now it's interesting. Bob, it's funny. I don't know how I wound up in Bob's band, but Bob, next to the Machito Orchestra, I started playing with Bob almost as soon as I came to New York, and playing in his big band. I've had a lot of connections with Bob. Bob also taught at Rutgers when I was there, and Bob also played on some of the shows that I played in. And I always used to check out Bob as far as the way he ran his career. And I used to think it dawned on me very early. I said, this is a guy who knows how to make this thing work, because Bob always had a small group. He always had a big band. He always had a teaching job. And for a while there, he always had a show on Broadway. Now he would make the mandatory like 51% of the shows. But Bob, it's like every aspect of his career, he was playing at a super high level. He was writing at a super high level. He wrote songs. He wrote arrangements. I just thought that this is a guy who really had figured things out. So the other thing about Bob Mintzer is that he accomplished one of the most difficult things in music, in my opinion, and that is to achieve your own sound as an arranger. He clearly comes out of Thad, and he also comes out of Tito Puente too. Because he played with Tito. But if you listen to it, you can hear those connections. But you also hear that his own harmonic language, the progressions that he writes, and just this kind of a lot of add to kind of chords, that has a kind of a sincere, kind of a harmonic sincerity, I like to call it. This is something pure and kind of natural and wholesome, I would say, about Bob's. He would laugh if he heard me say that. Yeah, I would say there's something about Bob's music that has its own. I mean, hear a Bob Mintzer chart, it's a Bob Mintzer chart.
Immediately. I interviewed him and we talked about that incredible journey, that project, and I can still see what I was seeing and feel what I was feeling like the first time I heard that, recording. And it's like the right title, and part of my memories of hearing his music was me in a hot summer day, and in my first vehicle, I was a pickup truck, and it didn't have any air conditioning, so the windows had to be all the way down. And I'm a musician, right? So I've got like a souped up radio with like kickers, and I was a hip hop head too when I was a kid. So, and his recording just blaring the incredible journey, and I'm writing down. I grew up in the country, and so a lot of the trips that I would take between like where I grew up in Eaton Rapids, Michigan, which is like a sort of rural it's like a kind of a rural suburb of Lansing, which is the capital of Michigan. We lived about halfway between Eaton Rapids and Lansing, but technically it was Eaton Rapids Township. And so driving from there to the school I went to, Western Michigan University, there was some back roads that I needed to take, and I can almost see like the color of the shirt I had on. It's like red or something, my truck is red, my arm is hanging out the window, and I've got Incredible Journey blaring because I'm driving 65 or something on the back road, So it's incredible that how music, and in particular composition, like arrangements, like in arrangements for large ensembles, like for big bands and things, how I mean, you talked about hearing your arrangements as played by great musicians is like a drug. Well, it's like a drug listening to it too. Hearing it, especially a great arranger like yourself. Can you also talk about your time with Michel Camilo?
It's interesting. My association with Michel happened because of my association with Lou Soloff. When I first came to New York, you're trying to figure out how in the world you're going to get yourself started. How are you going to work? How are you going to introduce yourself into the profession? And right. Someone had told me, Lou Soloff is the guy you should know. So I spent a year trying to get a lesson with Lou Soloff. I'd call him up and I'd say, Lou, I'd like to get a lesson with you. And he'd say, sure, come over such and such a day. And then, the day of, I would call him and say, hey, I'm getting ready to come over. And he'd say, oh, no, I can't see you today. I got a session, or I got a blah, blah, blah. This went on like that for a year. And finally, one day, you know, I was subbing with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers at the Village Gate. So I thought, okay, this will get Lou's attention. So I called him up and said, hey, Lou, you know, I'm playing with Art Blakey. You want to come down and hang at the, you know, at the Village Gate? And, you know, he said, oh, I can't make it, you know, but yeah, you know, come on by the, you know, come on by my house. He had a house on the Upper East Side of New York. So the next time I asked him for a lesson, you know, yeah, it was different. So I went over there, and you know, so he says, well, play me something. So I, you know, I took my horn and I played, you know, the beginning of the Haydn Trumpet Concerto. And he was like, wait a minute, I thought you were a jazz guy. There was a jazz guy I was supposed to be seeing today. And I was like, no, that's me. He said, really? I said, yeah. He said, okay, play me a high G, a double high G, as loud as you can. So I was like, okay, bang, you know. And he was like, okay. He started calling me to sub for him on gigs because I guess he figured that I could, you know, the things that he was doing. If he needed a sub, he figured I could do it, you know. So he was playing with Michelle. He was playing with Michelle. You know, they had played together in a band called French Toast. And Michelle, you know, they were both sidemen in that band to this guy named Peter Gordon, who was the band leader. But Michelle started his own band, and it had Anthony Jackson, it had Dave Weckl was playing drums, and Lou was playing trumpet, and Sammy Figueroa was playing percussion. Chris Hunter was playing saxophone. Anyway, Lou, you know, there were some gigs that Lou couldn't do. You know, so he gave me this book of music. He said, hey, learn this music. I want you to be able to sub for me with Michelle Camille. I'm looking at this music and I'm thinking, this is not playable on the trumpet. This is, it was like, you know, that's, you can't play it on the trumpet. So I went and saw the band at this club, uptown club called McKell's. And that's the first time I'd heard anything like that, you know, because this was Latin jazz, but it was not like, you know, it wasn't like Machito. This was another thing. And just the level of virtuosity these guys were doing, but because I could hear Lou do it, then I figured, okay, this can be done. So I can remember being in Spain with the Machito Orchestra, woodshedding this music, knowing that I was going to have to come back and play. So anyway, I went to a rehearsal, you know, and, you know, the rhythm section had been rehearsing before I got there, and it's Dave Weckl and Anthony Jackson, and they're doing some tune in 7/4, and playing all over playing groups of 5 against 7/4 over the bar lines, and I'm thinking, man, I need to just go home now. But I started playing with the band, and then, you know, Lou and Michelle started not getting along with one another because, you know, they were used to being like this, and Michelle started getting like this, and it was grating on them. So Lou left the band, and I joined the band, which was a little weird for me, actually, to tell you the truth. That situation only was made better, at least in my mind, when Michelle started recording with the big band, and I was able to get Lou back in the band, and we, you know, because it felt weird for me that's the first time I'd ever taken a gig over from someone who had it before. And as much as I wanted to play with Michelle, I felt bad that Lou and Michelle had kind of not been good with each other at the end of that. I didn't like that, but it was okay. I mean, it was okay with Lou. We were still friends, but it did feel awkward. But anyway, playing with Michelle taught me a lot about playing the trumpet, because I had always played very hard. That's, you know, not being a school trumpet player from the beginning. Like I said, I didn't really learn how to play the trumpet correctly when I started. The way that I got to be a good trumpet player, you know, both classical music and jazz, was just by practicing a lot, not by playing correctly, I think. And this was the first time I played music where you could not blast your way through it. It was just too hard and too fast. And if you play too hard, you were going to die. You were going to go down in flames really quickly. So I had to learn how to play with a lighter touch and to be more precise. And, you know, at the tempos that we were playing, and the technical difficulty and the range of that music, I had to learn how to play a different way. It was, you know, learning how to play with Michelle was one of the things that probably helped my trumpet playing the most. Of course, Michelle is a marvelous composer, and we started doing some movie stuff with this director named Fernando Choeva. We did an album called we did a bunch of things. We did this movie called too much. It had Antonio Banderas and now Daryl Hannah and Melanie Griffith. And at the end of the movie, Paquito de Rivera and Cachao and Michelle, and we're all playing, and this thing at the end of the movie. So I met Fernando, and I wound up scoring his film Chico and Rita, which was nominated for an Academy Award in 2012.
Yeah.
But that association with Fernando Trueba came from my association with Michelle, and I contracted Michelle's big band record, the first one that he did. Michelle started trusting me. I helped him with tiny bit of orchestration, because Michelle doesn't need any help with orchestration. But I helped him on one film that he was doing, just a couple little details. And then we did this project in Germany with the WDR, the Westdeutsche Rundfunk Band. They brought Michelle in, and I wrote the program using Michelle's music. And Michelle trusted me to do that because, we'd been together for so long, and we just recorded that music, an album called Essence. So all those charts I wrote for the WDR, we wound up recording here in New York with the New York band. And that's only because the WDR band likes to record. Normally they record live. Their albums are live performances. We just did another album this past year with Hendrik Merkens, a great German harmonica player. We did that in the studio, but that's simply because of social distancing. Normally they don't record that way. But so I've had, wow, it's 34-year association with Michelle Camilo. 34 years. That's unbelievable, right?
Now I'm going to tell you one of his records that I have, and part of it is like, I have great memories of all great music stuff, stuff that there was something like that was really different about that turned my ear or something. We all kind of have those experiences, but I think in your sort of formative years and certain points in your life, stuff just kind of sticks harder and stays harder, and one of those recordings is One More Once. And just hearing that, I mean, that was the first time I had heard anything like that. That was quite incredible. Pretty, and I like really flashy, aggressive stuff. So that record is like right up my alley.
That's a cult.
But yeah, but even for me at that time, it was pretty intense, but I mean, I think I burned a hole in that CD, or I don't even know if you can, but I think I tested the limits. Yeah. So, okay. So I see some weight equipment behind you, and you got a bag, punching bag.
Yeah. Yeah, we're lucky that, during the COVID and all the gyms are closed, when, I set this gym up here. As we're starting to get older. You can see that weight rack behind us there. That's for safety. I don't have a spotter here, so, and my wife, and she likes to work out with weights, and the kids are here a lot, and everybody's using this. So I'm very happy to say, this is good.
That's really cool. I mean, so how much do you work out? And I mean, do you have, or have you had particular goals in mind with your training? And then how do you feel like, or do you feel like it has had a positive effect on your playing?
Oh, absolutely. Well, as I said earlier, when I was a kid, I was badly bullied when I was a little kid, and I was so skinny that I had to run around in the shower to get wet, And, I was really, really skinny. I found an old, I don't know how, but I wound up making the basketball team when I was in high school, and I was, there's a picture of me, playing like this, and it looks like a pencil. And but at one point, it's such low self-esteem as a kid. I joined the swim team where you know, over the border in Chester, you know, where I grew up, and to everyone's surprise, I actually won a race, which had never happened in my family before. No one had ever won an athletic competition in the history of my family, I think. And everyone was kind of shocked. And the idea of winning something, an athletic competition, it kind of changes your perception. It changes your self-esteem. And I from that point on, I started really becoming interested in sports and wound up playing basketball and playing baseball. But I was so skinny when I got to college. I was on the Oberlin soccer team, and I used to I was getting hammered. These guys, just physical. There's a lot of stuff that the ref doesn't see. And I started realizing that I needed to bulk up a little bit. So, since the first time I'd ever had access to a gym, I started working out. And once you start working out, you get kind of addicted to it. It feels good. You see results. You feel stronger, you feel better, and that release of energy, I think it helps your mood. I think it helps you think through things. So I think that getting involved with weight training and running and all that kind of stuff at an early age, I think it's extraordinarily helpful. And you go through different times of your life. You live in a little apartment. If you have access to a gym, you're lucky. Sometimes you go through maybe a couple of years where you don't, and it kind of slides. But as long as I've ever had my own place, I've always put a gym in it. I like going to the gym, but one of the things I don't like is when you see people sitting there on a piece of equipment and texting, and it just makes me so wherever
bad gym etiquette.
Yeah, there's just a lot of places they just don't have that. So I always put up the gym. And of course, my wife uses it, and kids use it. So it's something. Plus, I've also had some health challenges in the past, and being able to, when you get older, sometimes your training shifts from bodybuilding to physical therapy. Sometimes you have to, rehabilitate from an injury. So we have all that, rehabilitation stuff here. My wife had hip surgery, and I've had to rehabilitate a leg that was kind of atrophied from using I had to use prednisone for an autoimmune illness. So, sometimes sometimes you're building up, and sometimes you're building yourself back. And like I say, as you get older, you start to shrink. And if you don't want to shrink away to nothing, then you gotta counteract that by working out. So, I lift at least 3 times a week, and then you're running. I also have an elliptical trainer. You probably can't see it from here, but I have an elliptical trainer that helps when you can't take the stress of running. You can still do some cardio. Yeah, it's important.
Yeah, I like to hear that because I'm a fitness advocate. I'm constantly talking to my students about, getting to the gym, or at least, getting some calisthenics, doing some, regular calisthenics, a few days a week. They tell you that, what is it, 30 minutes of exercise or something, 5 days a week or whatever. And what they were saying is that only before COVID, I think it was like 30% of the population were meeting that.
Mm-hmm.
And after COVID, it's much worse, because a lot of gyms have been shut down. And then I think just generally people kind of closing themselves in the house and whatever. But you can still get out and you can jog, or you can run, or at least walk, like I said, calisthenics, things like bands and stuff like that. I live in a red state, and there's some aspects of that are maybe not the greatest, but there's some aspects of that I think have actually been beneficial for me. I need the gym. I really do. It's such it's like therapy. It helps me to to deal with stress in a more healthy way. And then of course there's the whole kind of the rhythm of, you know, getting up in the morning, getting your stuff ready, picking stuff out that you're going to wear at the gym, getting to the gym. You know, there's a rhythm about that is beneficial. So they shut the gyms down at the beginning of the quarantine,
right?
Or the lockdown, whatever, you know, March, second or third week of March, but the gyms opened back up in Ohio at the end of the day after Memorial Day, and they've been continuously open since then. Now they've had to put a bunch of, you know, they've had to reduce the amount of stuff that's in the gym, you know, routinely clean, everybody wears a mask. I mean, you know, there's a long list of things that they had to comply with. But to my knowledge, there hasn't even been a single case. You know, there hasn't even been a single person that's called the gym and said, hey, check it out. Yeah. I'm positive for this and you should do X, Y, and Z. And so that's been, I don't know if you want to say it's lucky, or you can just say that whatever is going on in the gym that I go to, that maybe they have something figured out. But I'm a 5 days a week guy, and I have been I've been putting a series of videos on my Instagram and Facebook called "On the Road to a 430-pound bench press."
I only have about 200 pounds to go.
So my max is 415, and I think that I'll be able to get to 430 by the end of this calendar year. I'm on a, you know, the way that strength works is it goes like this, you know, you can't stay peak strength for a long time, because then, you know, first of all, it's not healthy for you because your body starts to take a beating, your joints and ligaments and everything. Right. But then also it's just,
what do you do then?
It's,
once your ligaments start taking, because right now I'm at 245 and my shoulders are starting to hurt. This is starting to get sore in here.
Well, what I'm saying is, I go back and forth between, so if I'm trying to increase my max, I'll do stuff like negatives, which is you load the bar up with more weight than you can carry, and someone else has to pull it off of you. So, I mean, you're going down really slow, and then they pull it off of you.
Good luck here. Maybe I'll get my wife to help me out with that and see what she says.
But the other thing is just, you know, less reps in higher weight, right? But after a period of time, your body starts to decode things, and then also you start to get sort of a wear and tear. And so trying to stay up at whatever the peak is, it's much better to only have periods of time where you're right at the top, and then I'll go back to more reps and lower weight. And so it's kind of like you have to kind of keep playing with what the thing is, and you know, the number get higher and higher at the peak. But I never had a big bench press when I was probably at the age that most folks would have a big bench press if they were going to have one. So because I've had a history of issues with my shoulders. But it seems like some of that stuff has gotten better. Plus, I think I made a lot of mistakes in my training when I was a lot younger.
Sure. Yeah.
And it seems like my technique is better now, and my approach to doing it is better. I'm 46. I feel like I have about 4 or 5 years where I can still go after some numbers. And then after that, I'm just going to, you know, I don't need to be the weight that I am if I'm not trying to press weight. So
it's interesting.
Then I'm gonna,
when Hogan was you know, he used to talk about that because, you know, obviously as a football player, he was huge. He had to be, or else he'd get killed. And he was talking about how he had to go about that difficult transition. You know, it's difficult. He had to lose the weight. He had to take it off him, because if you're not keeping it up, how it become a health issue. You see how many, you know, NFL guys stroke out or have heart attacks at a young age, because they're not sustaining that, you know, they're used to eating and, you know, but they're not sustaining on a regular basis. It's hard to take that off, because you build it, you invested so much to put it on. It's hard to give that up, but it's,
well, I think right. A lot of it is right. Well, I think what you're implying is that psychologically, it's hard to give it up, right? You remember Evander Holyfield, of
Sure.
course, the great boxer. You know, this is a guy that built himself up basically from a middleweight.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just kept packing muscle on, and it's different. That is different than a person that is just naturally bigger, that is training down. Right. And so he got into some fights with, I remember Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe.
Mm-hmm.
And Riddick Bowe is this, you know, enormous, you know, big heavyweight. Yeah. And he always had to train down to the fight. Mm-hmm. And it is much, much harder to train up, you know, to try to stack muscle on to get up to it than it is to you know, to cut down, mm-hmm. to, you know, to get to whatever the fight, whatever you want your fight weight to be. Mm-hmm. And it's apparent that, you know, you watch those fights. I mean, a bigger guy can just lean on a smaller fighter, you know, even if they built themselves up, you know, they can lean on them, and it takes a toll over the course of the fight. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying that to say, in my case, maybe not to the same degree as what you described about yourself. I was a real skinny kid, and I really, over the years, I really have, you know, put muscle on. Mm-hmm. And it's just been a methodical process, and, you know, a continued kind of thing. So I think when I get to the point when I decide, okay, enough of this, I think I'll be able to lose the weight. I think I will have some psychological attachment to it, as you suggest.
But you know, the fittest person in our family is my wife's my stepson, who's he's currently serving in the Navy, and he's as far as I know, he doesn't. Most of his workouts are body weight training, and the things they do are pretty amazing. But they're not based on bulk. What the kind of work they're doing, you know, bulk is not the issue. You know, it's mobility,
right?
And so so there are other goals besides bulk. Bulk is necessary for certain things that you're going to do. Like I say, if you're out there in the field and people are knocking you around, if you don't have anything behind you,
right.
But there are, I think just adjusting your fitness goals for what it is that you have to do. It is interesting how many musicians, how many jazz musicians are like physical training. Like my buddy Antonio Hart over at Queens, who's in deeply in martial arts, or we've all known lots of guys that that have some sort of training. It's just that habit and the routine and the discipline and the reaching a goal. I think the things are very, very, very much intertwined.
Do you know Dwight Adams?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't, but I certainly know of him. Yeah.
Yeah. So Dwight Adams, and this was 20 years ago or something. He was Mr. Michigan.
Really? That's hard to do. A lot of fitness guys.
I'll tell you. My workout routine is loosely based on his. I mean, he taught me all kind of stuff because when I took the job at Ohio State, he was the jazz trumpet instructor. And of course, I knew him prior to that. He's on a couple of my recordings. and so is Marcus Belgrave, actually. Um, and but you know, we worked together, and so we were able to train together, and he showed me all kind of stuff, and he talked to me about diet, and we got into posing and stuff, and all kinds of stuff. And unfortunately, I was never able to compete in a competition because of due to injuries. I would try to, you know, start the cutting process to get down to the weight I needed to be, you know, in the conditioning that I needed to be competitive. And I would tear tendons. Yeah, because you know, you tear tendons, and I wasn't doing a lot of weight. It's just as you cut down, it makes you more susceptible to that. And I didn't.
As you cut down, as you cut down on food, you mean on diet?
Well. So in order to cut down, and you've got to, you know, you have to eat certain things, and you can't eat other things, and but stuff like salt, having salt in your diet is makes it harder to lose weight because you retain a lot of water. But the problem is if you don't have enough salt, you tear ligaments, or I'm sorry, you tear tendons, and you can get injured pretty easily. So, of course, I didn't really know that, so I was cutting stuff out that I probably shouldn't have cut out, at least not at that stage. And but yeah, Dwight is a beast. Dwight was totally ridiculous, and he was totally natural. And Mr. Michigan is an open bodybuilding competition. What that means is that there was guys on stuff.
Oh, right.
Standing next to him.
Yeah.
And he still won.
Wow. Yeah.
He's a bad dude.
Yeah.
So I see this heavy bag in the back too, and it reminds me of something my father did. He bought a heavy bag and he put it out in the garage. And I can't remember how old I was. I must have been, I don't know, maybe I was 12 or 13 or something like that. But he put it out in the garage, and he got me some, you know, some gloves, and he said, hey, you know, if you're feeling frustrated, you know, here's, you know, go do this. And what's strange is, you know, your parents, often your parents know you much better than you know yourself, and or can, you know, sort of forecast certain kinds of ideas that you may start forming. I have a 7-year-old, and so I'm starting to recognize that, and often he's surprised that I know what he was going to say before he says it, right? And I didn't realize that I was frustrated or, you know, or anything like that. But apparently he saw something that made him think that, oh, you know, in case that is an issue, let's just go do that. And so that became something that I used to do. I kind of mix it in with some of the other workout stuff that I did. Do you go after the heavy bag very much?
I use it more, actually. You know, I got the heavy bag more for my hips because, like, as I said, I suffered a hip injury. I actually had vascular necrosis in both hips. Which is tough. And both hips survive, which means they're not supposed to, because necrosis means dead. So I have zombie hips. They're the undead hips. But in order to regain mobility, I mostly do kicking exercises with that bag.
Oh, I see.
Raise my hip and kick, and it's amazing. It's wonderful cardio. It's fantastic cardio. I mean, I'll do, you know, I have the gloves, but I don't punch the bag nearly as much as I kick it. And it's kind of like what I do at the end of my workout. I just, after doing weights, do some stretching, and then I'll do some kicking just to get my cardio. Do jump rope and do some kicking. And it really does, you know, keeps you loose if you can get your legs up. Hickman building.
Can you talk about some current events, some projects that you're working on right now, and maybe some things that you want to plug?
Well, the project that I just finished is an album over in Cologne. I was very, very, very lucky. I managed to get over to Cologne, Germany, to record with the WDR band just before they locked the country down. Actually, getting over there was fraught. When I got there, they were going to send me home because I didn't have the proper paperwork. But someone at the German embassy relented, and I was able to get in, and we had a remarkable week, 10 days actually of recording. And then as soon as our recording was finished, they locked down the whole country and everything is shut down. And they had to stop, which is very, very sad. But we felt very fortunate. So, but this album, it will come out as an album with Hendrik Merkens. My next project, performance project and recording project, is going to also be with WDR in April with a wonderful young lady named Andrea Modis, who she grew up playing in this band in Catalonia, this guy named Juan Chamorro, who's got these youth bands over there outside of Barcelona, who does amazing things with these young kids. And this young lady, she plays trumpet, she plays saxophone, and she's a wonderful singer, Andrea Motis. And we'll do a recording with her. So I'm getting ready to, I mean, every time one of these projects comes up, it means that I'm going to be sitting at a desk, like writing charts for a couple of months, which I think probably saves my marriage. That's my wife would say, like, yeah, just go write some music.
Let me ask you about your writing process. So are you using like computer software, or are you are you a Finale guy?
Yeah, I mean, some guys are very rah about their music software. Like some guys are Sibelius, and then some guys are Finale, and there's a new thing called Dorica, and there's MuseScore and all this stuff. But it's not the software; it's the music. I got into Finale because Finale was the only thing really available. I mean, I've been on it since 1993, I think, and it's wonderful. I mean, my handwriting is horrible. I really used to suffer terribly when I had to do scores by hand and to copy parts. It was, I suffered, and everyone having to read it had to suffer. I used to make notes with rulers and stuff to try to keep the line straight. I have just no patience for writing notes. But with Finale, I can try things and edit things and change things and, try different things and hear them right away. The sequencing part of Finale is very helpful because you can just eliminate choices very quickly. And then once you're done, you can. It's just a step to edit and add articulations and dynamics and things. It's just, it's something we all dreamed about before it actually existed. So I'm a big fan of that. I use it all the time.
Now, in my own composing, when I was much younger and didn't know very much about writing or theory or any of that stuff, I would hear a melody and then I would write the melody down, and then I would try to figure out what would work with the melody, right? It seems that more often than not these days, the approach is I'll come up with a harmonic structure that I like, and then I'm using my skill as an improviser to allow certain melodies to sort of emerge out of the sort of structure that I've set up. So I'm curious, what is your how does music occur to you?
Well, there's many different processes, and it kind of depends on what you're trying to do. I often liken being a composer and arranger to being an architect. There's a lot of ways you can build a house or a building, but the main thing is you have to figure out, there's a lot of questions you ask, like, well, who's going to live in that building, and where is it going to be located, and what are the materials that you're going to use, and what's the licensing process to get permits, and what are the ages of the people that are going to be there. So as a composer, I'm thinking always about, well, who's going to play this music, and is it going to be on an album? Is it going to be on a live performance? What does this chart got to do? Is it the high point of a show? Is it an intimate part of a show? You know, what does the artist need to do? You know, who am I featuring here, and what do they need out of it? And what's the band, and what is their history, and what's their, so there's, you know, there's a lot of different considerations. You could write a very good chart that doesn't do the job. And I've done that too, by the way. I've written music that was, you know, good chart, but it didn't function well. Save it for something else, hopefully. But usually by the time if you ask the right questions, by the time you start asking the right enough questions about what you're doing, you start hearing it in your head. You know, by the time you've thought about what it is that you're trying to come up with. So very rarely do I just write music just to write it. I'm almost always writing for something that I have to write for. I've never really had the luxury of just sitting down and writing something. It's always somebody needs something. So then I'm trying to think, well, what do they need? And then, you know, how should it be? And what am I trying to come up with? And by the time I think about it enough, the idea is you start hearing them. And of course, if you're used to transcribing music, then you just transcribe what's going on in your head. Usually I find more than not, it starts with a mood. You know, what's the mood of this piece? And that will lead to a groove. You know, what kind of groove is that going to be? What kind of rhythm am I going to be using? And then that leads to a melodic idea, because, you know, groove means there's going to be certain kinds of rhythms in the melody. And then there are certain kinds of, I would say, off-the-shelf kind of progressions. And then there are progressions that kind of evolve more in a storytelling way. You know, if you think about something like Benny Golson's progressions, they're very storytelling. It takes a path, it kind of takes you around and around. And then there are progressions that are kind of like vampy kind of progressions, you know, that are just kind of repetitive, almost like colors that just kind of happen, like rhythmic colors. So, you know, they're less functional in the sense of getting you here, and then you go here, and then you go here. They're just kind of, you're here and doing this, and then you're here and doing this. So there's different kinds of progressions that fit different types of song.
Right.
And sometimes I'm taking a song and trying to redefine it. And sometimes I'm taking an existing song and just trying to add a little bit of push or a little bit of color. So it really, you know, the process kind of depends on what the function of the song is, or the arrangement is about.
So in my experience, when the more details I have about the arranging project, the easier it is for me to write.
Sure.
Because, you know, I can obey the rules very well. Okay, you want this, so you want it to kind of be this way. You want it to be this number of measures. You want it to be like that. It's the composing part that, when it's not composing for, you know, it's not, well, I mean, I guess it's for a project, but it's sort of composing for something that I'm doing from one of my own projects. That's the composing that I feel like I labor over way more, and it ends up being way more time consuming than necessary, because I have a hard time letting go of certain ideals, or, you know, it's like I'm too altruistic or something with what I, you know, it's like, you know, after hearing so much great music, it's like, well, you know, I want my music to stand on the same platform with all of this other great music. And so the standard is so high that it almost makes it, you know, like, why do I need to write this? Like, what's the purpose of me writing this if it's not going to be any good? You know, it's almost turns into that. Do you feel like you have get sort of paralysis when something is just not quite doing what you want it to do? And if so, what are ways that you try to kind of break out of that?
Deadline, you know. every time someone gives me a project, every time I get a project, I get this, you know, get that same panic, like I can't do this, you know, who am I kidding, you know? And then next thing you know, you just sit down and you realize, man, I have to do this. I agreed to do it. I've given my word, and this project's going to happen. And you know, and if I don't get this thing done, it's not, you know. So you wind up at a certain point realizing this may not be the best thing I've ever written, but I'm going to get started. And then what happens is, and I tell this to my arranging students all the time, especially the ones that have never done it before, I say, just write something, because once you write something, you can fix it. You listen to it and you say like, well, I don't like that. And you say, well, why don't I like it? Well, I don't like it because of this. So you change it, and now suddenly you like it a little better. And then one thing leads to another. But it's like you have to get in motion. And even if you write something and you really don't like it at all, that it still gives you the basis of moving on from there. You can say like, okay, well, I don't like this because, and that's and you know, one of the things, you know, I work with Hal Leonard. It's my you know, my publisher, and you do too. I saw you got a book published with them.
Yeah.
One of the things working with them really helped me is that, you know, with Mike Sweeney over there and Jim Gagne, these guys who I work with, they're editors. It's wonderful. I learned the editing process from them, and Slide Hampton too. By the way, when I would write from, I'll tell you a funny story. First time I had to write a chart for Slide, we were doing a Charlie Parker project, and he wanted everybody to pick a Charlie Parker tune, so I chose Alucha. And I wrote this introduction, and I brought it over to his place. He was living on 57th Street at the time, and you know, he put it up on his piano, you know, and here I'm like, you know, this kid, and I've got this my score, and this Slide Hampton's looking at, and he plays through the thing, and he's looking at it, and he says, Michael, this is very good. Now what we have to do is figure out how to make it better. And I thought, oh man, this is back to the drawing board. But what I came to realize is this, that's what he meant. It's exactly what he meant. He meant this is very good, but that's not good enough. That once you have something that's good, you got it. Now you've got something here. Now what are you going to do with it? What's next? How are you going to prove that? And that ethic that you don't just have to take the first draft of everything you do, that you listen to it and you let it percolate, and you say like, okay, well, now I get it. That, you know, and sometimes you write something and it's all right, but sometimes you say like, you know, that could be better. This doesn't do this enough, or this is something, or this is a little, and then, but because you wrote something, you edit. You can say like, okay, but maybe this doesn't agree with this, or maybe this needs to go a little more, or maybe this is too over the top and it needs to back off a little bit. You know, and that's what I do with my students most of the time. We open up their scores and we listen to it, and we make suggestions, and we try stuff in real time. I'll mess it up. I'll take the score and I'll mess it all up. And half the time, you know, after a half an hour, I'm like, you know what? It was better off the way it was. It's fun, but you're messing around with things and seeing what you can find, and not worrying about what someone else did in the past. You're not, you know. You don't have to compare yourself to everybody else. You just have to compare yourself to what you're doing right now. Can I do this better? And that's fun, you know, because it's just, you know, constant exploration of things is great.
That definitely has been my experience, that once I get something down, editing stuff is that's, you know, you can just kind of use your musicianship and, you know, the stuff that you understand about music to make something better, to transform something that's pretty basic into something that's pretty advanced. And actually, it's not that. It's always is the getting something down in the first place. It's the from zero to something, you know, tends to be the issue. You know. Well, God bless you and your family, and be safe. And all of that.
Likewise, have a beautiful, have a Merry Christmas, happier New Year.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Can't wait for 2021 to get here. Can't get here fast enough. Goodness gracious.
Yeah. All right.
All right, man.
Take care.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.